to my health channel. I'm going to give you guys, to start, just kind of a general overview of how I got to where I am now, and then I'll be making some videos about the process that I'm going through now in terms of getting diagnosed, treatments that I've been doing, ways that I manage my symptoms, all of those kinds of things. So to get started, since I was about 5, I've had this chronic leg pain that doctors have not really been able to diagnose. When I was younger, they just kind of called it growing pains. And then as I got older, they were like, well, it's probably not that anymore, but we don't know what it is. I got x-rays at my PCP a couple of times, had them kind of do a physical exam, but they really couldn't pinpoint it to anything specific. I kept a pain journal, and it was behind my knee, but also up and down my whole leg. And I used to think that it was musculoskeletal, but as I've gotten older, I've started to think that it is joint related and that it's just radiating out from the joints, and that's why I kind of feel the whole back of my leg. But it's still hard to tell. I don't know necessarily for sure. I've seen an orthopedist, but I was planning to see a rheumatologist, and then that kind of got put on the back burner. I had that chronic pain, I had asthma, pretty mild, and in college I started to think that I was maybe lactose intolerant or have some sort of type of mild IBS. I would have sometimes just a little bit more stomach upset or symptoms than the average person. But all of that being said, I never had anything really major to worry about until August. In August, I got sick. When I first got sick, I thought that maybe I just eaten something funny. I took some medicine, kind of managed the symptoms, but then I started really feeling pretty sick and running to the bathroom a lot. I thought I had the stomach flu. That's really what I thought it was. I was really sick. I had called my PCP's office. They said, the stomach flu is going around. So it's probably that. Just kind of let your body go through it and kind of get everything out. Drink a lot of water, that kind of stuff. So I stayed at home a couple days in bed and just kind of did that and was doing okay. And then one night, a couple of days later, started having really intense pain, just unmanageable amount of pain. So I called the on-call doctor, and they said, call us back in an hour if it's still that bad. It was still that bad. I called them back. They asked me a bunch of questions. They said, we want to be safe. We don't want to miss it. So why don't you go to the hospital? I went to the hospital near my parents' house. This was when I was in between moving apartments and I was staying with my parents. So I went to the hospital near my parents' house, and they did they gave me a bunch of meds. They gave me fluids. They gave me blood samples and fluid samples and stuff like that. And then they did a CT scan. Well, on the CT scan, they did it with and without contrast, and the doctor in the ER told me that they found colitis. He explained that there are 2 kinds of colitis. Well, there's really more, but there's 2 main kinds. There's infectious colitis, so you get some sort of viral or bacterial infection, and that causes inflammation in the colon, and you have to treat the infection to treat the colitis. The other kind is ulcerative colitis, which is a chronic condition. It is a form of IBD, inflammatory bowel disease. I'll put some resources in the link below so you can read about it. And that is chronic inflammation of the colon, and it's treated by a GI. So he said he was going to refer me to a GI and that I should try to be seen, as soon as possible. It was really early in the morning at this point. But I went home after I was kind of stabilized, not in so much pain. I called this GI office. I expected them to not be able to take me for weeks or maybe months. I wasn't even sure if I was going to be able to see them before I moved. And they said, we'll see you today. So that was great. And I went to GI's office, and he kind of looked at my records and he did a physical exam, and then we kind of talked, and he said, well, I think from everything that you've told me that there's definitely a risk for IBD, so I want to do a colonoscopy. And then he put in the order for the colonoscopy for a couple of days later. Told me to go on a clear liquid diet to kind of give my bowels a break, which I did. And then he called me in the next couple of days as the results from the sample came in. I was negative for C. diff. All the other infections were negative as well. Of course, there's always the possibility that you have an infection that they didn't test for, but he felt pretty confident that they had tested for the things that I was likely to have and that we should move forward with the colonoscopy. He did the colonoscopy and he did biopsies. So what they found was inflammation in the lower left part of the colon. Similar to on the CT scan, they could actually see that on the colonoscopy. However, the biopsies were non-conclusive. They were non-diagnostic. He felt from my symptoms, medical history, and from the inflammation that they saw in both the scan and the colonoscopy that it was likely Crohn's. And I don't know too much because I'm not a doctor between ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, but Crohn's can be in any part of the GI tract. Ulcerative colitis is specifically in the colon, but with, I guess, the patchiness and certain indicators that he saw on the colonoscopy, he believed that it was Crohn's. So he pretty much diagnosed me really quickly. He got me on an anti-inflammatory. Eventually he decided to switch me to prednisone, which is a really common steroid to help treat IBD. On prednisone, I definitely saw some benefit. I had been extremely fatigued. I got a lot more energy when I was on the prednisone. I started gaining back the weight that I lost when I was on the liquid diet. I'm feeling really sick, which was good. It didn't really affect the amount that I was having to be in the bathroom. So we stayed on that while the Balsicide started to work, but I really didn't feel like at the point that he said it was supposed to start working that it was. So he switched me to mesalamine. And he also bumped the prednisone up to 30 milligrams. I don't know if it was the change in medications. I don't know if it was the increase in the steroid or what it was, but immediately all of that having to be in the bathroom 10 to 15 times a day went away, which was great. However, I started having almost the opposite problem, and I also started having a lot of pain around this time. So I had some cramping before just from kind of being so dehydrated and sick and everything, but it wasn't my main symptom. I was on the prednisone. I didn't have it as much either, but as the prednisone started to taper down, I started to get really intense stabbing pain, cramping pain, just abdominal pain in general. At this point, I had already moved, so after my colonoscopy and things settled down slightly, although not ideally as much as you would like them to, I moved to another state. At this point, I was still feeling pretty sick, and I decided to get another GI's opinion. I went to a second GI, and this GI said, well, looking at your results, the biopsies aren't diagnostic, so we can't actually say that it's Crohn's. What he said is it could be Crohn's, or it could be that you had an infection that wasn't showing up on the sample, and that now you have, that was treated, and that's why some of your symptoms went away, but now you have post-infectious IBS. You may know that IBS is more of an exclusionary diagnosis. It's not exactly very specific in what it means, and so I was pretty resistant at this point to just sort of assuming that it was that. So I was pretty confused, and I was feeling pretty lost, and he didn't give me a lot of answers. I decided to continue with my prednisone taper, continue with the anti-inflammatory that I had been on, and I actually decided to see a third GI, but this time I decided to do a lot more research in the New York area about who would be good. And I talked to a friend at this point who gave me a recommendation for a doctor who I looked up, who had fantastic reviews, who worked at an IBD center. So if you're in the New York area, my doctor was working out of Weill Cornell to see her. And she said kind of the same thing as the second doctor in terms of could be Crohn's, but it could be something else. We're not really sure at this point. The inflammation isn't necessarily indicative of one or the other. And so she wanted to schedule some more testing. She also wanted to do a flex sig to kind of see where we were at inflammation wise. So we did that in the office, no anesthesia, definitely wasn't comfortable, but it was fine. The good news was there was no more inflammation, so that was great. The bad news was we didn't really know what was going on. So since Crohn's can be anywhere in your GI tract and can be microscopic, she wanted to order some more testing. So I had an endoscopy done, I had an MRE done. I can go into my experience with all of these various tests if people are interested. Just comment below and I'm happy to talk about any specific test and people want to know more about. But I had the endoscopy, I had the FlexSig, I had the MRE, then I had a meeting with her. All of that stuff that I had was completely normal. There was no explanation for why I was feeling the way I did. I had negative for celiacs, I had negative for H. pylori, I had negative for finding any evidence of Crohn's through the MRI or any type of diverticulitis, anything like that. So she was really kind of unsure at this point, but there were still a few more steps she wanted to take.